Well, this is Tools of Assessment for Online Courses. My name is Jason Garvey, and I'm Manager of Instructional Design. So this will be a little bit of a different session, and then we'll have a little bit more interaction throughout the time. And so there'll be moments where you can unmute your mic and talk if you feel like you want to do that. Or if you want to put stuff in the chat, that's fine as well. I like to hear what you're having to say, so I do prefer if you unmute your mics and we'll just talk about some stuff. So this is going to be kind of thinking about what are some various means and methods of assessments in online instruction. And so two big terminology points we're going to use is formative and summative assessments, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But this is our overarching objective, in that hopefully by the end of the session you'll be able to kind of assess and to be able to differentiate and maybe even categorize different means and methods of assessments for online instruction. So this is where we're going to get a little bit more interactive. So when you think about assessments, what's the term, or when you think about the term assessment, what pops into your mind? And you can shout stuff off right now, and I'll type it in here, and this will then come back around at the end. So what do you think of when you think of the term assessment?
Learning outcomes.
Okay, learning outcomes. Okay.
Testing.
Testing. Okay.
Homework assignments.
Homework. Okay.
Discussion board.
Okay, discussion boards. Okay. Do you have a favorite type of assessment?
Papers.
Oh,
I love to read.
Papers. Okay. Reading of papers. Okay. Any other thoughts about the term assessment?
I like a variety of assessments in any course so that each student can shine.
Okay.
Because I don't believe one type really tells me what a student knows or can do.
Okay. So we're looking at a variety of assessments. Anything else?
Types, I guess. Yeah, assessment types.
Okay. So types. So we have different types. We can put that in two different things. Any other thoughts in terms of assessment?
How about evaluating student learning?
Okay.
Might be in the first panel.
Learning. Okay. Sometimes when I've talked to faculty about assessment, they'll come back and say lots of work, right? Or / lots of grading, maybe. Anything else? And that's, yeah.
I know in dental we use a lot of case studies.
Ooh, okay. Case studies. Perfect. And maybe if we think of one more, that's fine, but we don't have to have any more. So anything else that pops into your mind? I don't want to stop the conversation too soon. Okay. So that's good. This is going to come back around in a second. So when we think about tools of assessment for online learning, and we think about assessments, we ask ourselves, how will you as the instructor determine the extent to which learning is achieved? Or another way to put it is, what will you as the instructor accept as evidence showing the learner's comprehension and mastery of the material, or mastery of the skill? And so when we think about assessments, we're really talking about two big categories, formative and summative. And when we think about those two categories, what comes to mind? What's the difference between formative and summative?
Formative is not graded.
Okay, not graded. Okay. What about other thoughts about formative or summative? And again, some people say summative, so It's really tomato versus tomato, I think, at that point. But is there a difference between formative and summative?
I guess I always see formative as being able to provide the student with feedback that allows them to improve,
Okay.
where summative is more of like, here's your final grade.
Okay.
Good luck.
Yep. And then JC put in the chat, formative equals ungraded, summative equals graded. Okay, so those are two ways to do that. And then, we also get, like along the way, like they're getting graded to see how they're doing, and then summative is at the end. Here you go. That's it. Okay. Other thoughts about what you see as the difference, or how would you define formative? How would you define summative?
I was just going to also kind of agree with Kathy that formative is giving feedback along the way.
Okay. Yep. Feedback along the way. That's very, very good. Other thoughts about formative? Yep. Or summative? Okay. So if we had to technically define formative and summative, I would say formative is the demonstration of progress toward learning outcomes, and then summative is the demonstration of mastery of those learning outcomes. So again, and you're talking about it just now, I think you absolutely identified that progress, that it's happening throughout the course, and they are working towards something. And then summative, it's at the end. It's, have you done the mastery of this thing? It's not about the progress anymore. It's about have you mastered the learning outcome? So when we think about assignments in our courses, any type of assignment is a potential assessment, right? So when we use the word assignment, we can think about learning activities, or such as like discussion boards or exams or quizzes. So any type of assignment could potentially be an assessment, whether it's formative, whether it's part of that, and when we think about formative, it's part of that instructional sequence. It's for the purpose of measuring progress and providing feedback to the student. And oftentimes it's not part of the grade book or things like that. Or an assignment could be summative, and typically we think of that as a high stakes graded assignment, or a test that takes place at the end of the instructional sequence. But when we think about what matters most in terms of assessment, in both the formative and the summative category, we have to ask ourselves, is this assessment, is it relative to the objectives and goals of this course? Is it appropriate for the level and scope of the course content? Is it easily accomplished online? And is it clearly outlined to students on how they're to complete the task? So again, is it somehow related back to the learning outcomes, which is here what we have for the formative and the summative, right? They are demonstrating progress of the learning outcomes or the learning objectives, or they're demonstrating mastery of the learning objectives. And then we think about, is it appropriate for the level of the course content, or is it unrelated to the course content, or is it outside of the level? So if you're teaching a 100 level course, you're going to have very different assignments than if you're teaching a higher level course. And is the assignment easily accomplished online? And then is there like a clear outline for the students in terms of how they are to complete that? And so that's where when we start to think about assessments, those are some of the big categories that we have to think about on what matters most to the assessment. All right, so now let's talk about, and let's start to categorize these things. So this is where you can help me. So we've got to figure out which of these assessments would be formative or summative. So final exam, do we have a vote on whether that should go in the formative or whether that should go in the summative?
I would say summative.
Okay, summative. All right. Any sort of disagreements on that? Sherry says summative as well. What about a reflection?
Formative.
Ah, formative. Okay. All right. What about a journal entry?
I would say formative.
Formative.
Formative. Okay. What about a quiz? And we can come back to quiz.
It depends.
I know, right? Okay. All right. So maybe we'll hold off on quiz. What about a case study?
I think it kind of depends, but I would kind of say summative.
Okay. We got summative. Any other votes for summative, or any other bold people to say no, it's formative?
Could be
A
both.
lot of these, like from the quiz, the case study, some of these things you could, depends if you're putting weight on it,
Ah.
and depends if it's going to address any of the course outcomes. So I think you could have a formative quiz, but you could also have a quiz that counts in the same. Oftentimes, like we'll do a case study with them and go through one formatively with them first, and then there's a case study that counts.
Yeah, that's right. You got it. Yep.
Agree
So
with Sherry.
yeah, so there can be overlap between these. So oftentimes when we think of quizzes, it's happening throughout the course, and students are getting feedback. So we could put that in formative, but you're right. It could also be summative, and same with case study. It could be formative, or it could be summative. just depends. What about a thesis topic? So this is where the student would be choosing what they're going to be writing on.
I would say formative.
Yeah. Okay.
Formative.
Yep. And what about a research paper?
If it's a final one, then summative.
Summative. Okay. Yep. Then we have a discussion forum.
Formative.
Formative. Okay. And e-portfolio.
Summative,
So-
I think.
Okay. All right. Are we okay with the 5 and the 4 we've got here? We got 5 here and 4 here. Because it's the moment of truth. Because I'm going to click the little check and see if we're right.
What's at stake, Jason?
Just the universe. That's all. It's fine. Hey, we're right. But what you said is true. These could go in various categories. And as we think about like a traditional face-to-face class, right? You as the instructor, you are constantly conducting formative assessments, second nature throughout the course. And usually this is done informally. Think through, how do you typically do informal formative assessments throughout the course? As you're teaching face-to-face, how do you think you do that informally and throughout the course?
You ask a question.
Right. I just did that, didn't I? I'm informally, formatively assessing your knowledge, right? And so you're right, John. You start by asking questions to gauge and to measure and track students' comprehension and students' progress during a lecture. And this is very informal. There's no grade associated with it. Now, how could you do this formally? And so again, you have a formative assessment that's being done formally in that there is a grade attached to it. How would you do this in a face-to-face class?
Pop quiz.
You got it. Pop quiz. Yep. Pop quiz at the start of a class. Have you read the material? Have you watched the lecture? Etc. Have you done the things? And I'm going to test your knowledge on these things. And it's going to be a formal type of assessment, and it's going to happen along the way. Maybe another way would be some sort of mid-semester presentation in your course, right? So as you think about the face-to-face classroom, let's think about now the online classroom. So how would you, in an online classroom, how would you do formative assessments? Thoughts on that?
I actually allow my students 3 opportunities to take a quiz.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, they have a chance to improve their score. Most of them get a full points by the time they're done.
Okay.
So I consider that formative.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I pose a question through the discussion board for group input, and that the student replies to the question, and we have, discussion back and forth.
Awesome. Yep, that's great. Yep. So we got some quizzes, we got some discussion forums.
I use Course Arc.
Okay.
So I've embedded some like matching, just kind of like what you did here.
Mm-hmm.
Some matching activities, even some like charts that they have to fill out as formative.
Oh, that's great. That's yeah. So you've got these a little bit of interactive pieces where they have to fill in components. Yep, that's great. Mm-hmm.
I have students submit their thesis, main points, and sources
Yep.
for feedback before they write their outlines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yep. All right. Well, so you've said a lot of these. So these are the categories that I came up with in terms of online formative assessments. And you've said a lot of these in terms of a research thesis, short case studies was mentioned at one point, quizzes, discussion forums, etc. Maybe the other, part would be if they're having to build out some sort of a project. Let's say it's an e-portfolio, but let's say it's something larger. Students are submitting parts of that along the way. Perhaps you get some sort of journal or some sort of like reflection activity in there as well. So that would be some categories for online formative assessments, and some of those items would be graded, and some of those maybe would not be graded. But that doesn't mean that they're not formative if they're happening along the way. It just means some of them would be more of an informal, and some would be more formal if they were graded. Now, when we think about summative assessments. Right, so this occurs at the end of the course. It's used to determine how much mastery of the material students have with that subject. And they're usually high stakes. They are usually heavily weighted in terms of the grade book, and they're meant to be academically rigorous, correct? So in a face-to-face class, what would examples be of summative assessments?
Final
exams, yep. Mm-hmm.
And an intro to COM, also final presentations.
Okay, yep, you got a final presentation, yep. Okay. Other thoughts on how you do summative face-to-face?
Presentations.
Yep, presentation, okay, yep. And these would typically be student presentations where they're bringing in a whole host of research, and would they also be submitting maybe like a research paper with that as well? Yep, and then someone put in term test papers and projects. Yep, okay. So as you think about an online class, what would examples of summative assessments be? This is kind of a trick question because it's what we just mentioned, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, that's right. So when we think about summative assessments, and here's a list and of you have a final draft of a research paper. Maybe there's an analysis of a book which they have to submit. Maybe they have to synthesize multiple articles or readings, or they have to do a final business proposal, final exam. Maybe it's a larger case study that's pulling in a lot of different content, and so they're going to be spending more hours on that than they would be for a short case study. Maybe it's the final submission of an e-portfolio, or you've got maybe a video of the learner demonstrating the skill or knowledge taught in the course. And so, these would be ways to do some online summative assessments. So when we think about assessments, we have to make sure that they are a variety of different types. They have to allow students to be assessed from a number of different perspectives using a diverse set of skills. We also have to be careful about the number of assessments, making sure that it's appropriate for the course, and also the pacing of the assessments. Do students have enough time to complete the assessments along the way? And is there enough time for you as the faculty member to give them feedback? Another way to think about it would be, are there some options for student choice? Are there different levels of challenges which they could undertake along the way? But really the big thing is when you're doing online assessments, in order to uphold academic integrity and to help students as they prepare for the next class, and even as they prepare for their next career move, or let's have authentic assessments that have real-world applications. I remember when I took part of my grad program online in instructional design, we had to create these assignments and we had to do these projects. I'm still referencing back to them in terms of the stuff which I was able to create. I still go back to as I help you all teach online, because I had ended up creating these things and these charts and these larger projects. I still go back to them. So that's what I would say in terms of doing assessments online, making sure that they're authentic and they have real world application. So we had asked, what pops into your mind when you think of the term assessment? So these were our answers. Would you answer the question any differently now? And that's okay if you don't want to answer the question differently now. But I do think we have some very good things in terms of, tying it back to the learning outcomes. We have tests, we have homework assignments, we have discussion forums, papers. The variety of assessments is something we just talked about. Different types. You're evaluating student learning. You have case studies. You didn't say lots of work, lots of grading. That's what I've heard from other faculty at other institutions. So that's not on you. So our final thing for today is putting this into practice. Suppose you were teaching a course online on the basics of hiking and backpacking. And you might be saying, I don't know if that could be done online. And I would say, well, Steph Curry taught a class on the fundamentals of basketball online. So surely we can teach a class on the basics of hiking and backpacking online. So as we think about how would we, what sort of assessments would we have for this course? So let's say our audience is adult learners, no prior experience. This is a very basic subject. This is an online course. It's self-paced, asynchronous, 6 weeks. We have some readings, we have some videos, and our goals for the course is for the student to demonstrate the ability to plan and pack for a hiking trip, and then for them to describe and to classify the various equipment needed for a hiking trip. So how would you, as the instructor, determine the extent to which the learner demonstrates these goals? What are some formative assessments and what are some summative assessments? Thoughts on that?
I mean, certainly drafts of the plan or worksheets or things related to how you create that plan.
Okay.
As being formative, and then the final plan.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Being summative.
Yep. So, you would have them start to draft that out. Yep. Okay. Other thoughts on some formative or summative ways of students being assessed on their knowledge?
A presentation of them actually packing their pack for the trip.
John, why is that important?
Because it actually shows them that they're able to, get the stuff that's required and then actually put it in the pack.
Yep.
Where it's going to, be able to put on their back and take their trip.
Yep. And Sherry said the same thing. Sherry, do you have other thoughts on why that's important?
I think it goes, I'm looking at the goal.
Mhm.
It was to demonstrate, so using that verb like literally. I wanted to make sure they could do that, and then I was just going to type in there, similar to what we did with the formative and summative classifying. It could be like drag and drop little activities that they would do to for formative to get prepared to be able to make that video of packing it.
Yeah. So you'd have a whole bunch of different items, and they have to drag them into their pack, and you'd have like a donut, and be like, well, you don't want to drag the donut in because that's not helpful for your trip. Although maybe a donut would be helpful, right? Right. But do you have matches? Do you have a flashlight? Do you have a first aid kit? Do you have an emergency blanket? Do you have water? Let's not add extraneous stuff, because remember, you have a limited amount which you can carry on your back. Yep. Other ways you would do this outside of having them do an exam, because you guys have not said exam yet, which is great, right? Because oftentimes exams can help to measure it, but it seems like oftentimes it just becomes it's not a good way perhaps to measure that the student's actually done this. And for this case, right, if you were to do like a multiple choice quiz, right, maybe you would do that like along the way, but at the end of the course, like John was saying and like Sherry was saying, you want them to show that they've done something, and to show that skill.
I know it's not one of the goals, but I would love to have them actually take the hike.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then reflect on what they learned,
Mm-hmm. And maybe have them take photos at different spots along the way to prove that they've taken it, and then to be able to reflect on it. Yep. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Other thoughts? So this was the question which we asked just now: what types of formative and summative assessments would you utilize? And again, these were the goals which you all clearly identified in terms of, okay, if they're going to be doing these things, then we need to have them show that they've done that. So for formative, again, these are some of our options, right? So, having them submit things in parts along the way, the whole check-in points, things like that. And then, summative list in terms of, this was our big list, which we had, which you all identified, one of them being the video of the learner demonstrating the skill or knowledge taught in the course. So I think that's excellent. If you all are interested in more about it, here are a few resources out there about teaching online, practical guides, ways to assess online learning and whatnot.